Okay, hello everybody. That's my teacher's starting voice. I'll just do a very brief introduction to me in this session, and then I'm going to introduce our fantastic international panel that is over to my right. So welcome everybody. I've heard that the conference is fantastic so far. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Professor Lisa Stansby, and I'm one of the Pro-Vice Chancellors here at the university. So I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education, Culture and Society, part of the University Executive. So today I'm going to introduce the panel, our international panel, which Sean will kindly be chairing. And the theme of this is towards global inclusion, the role of universal design in bringing about systemic change. Before we go into this fantastic session, I'm going to do some brief introductions to the people that we've got together on the panel today. They're going to be sharing their insights into this really interesting topic. And I think it's a really brilliant array of academics, international academics, that we've got together in this session. So first member of our panel, and they aren't sitting necessarily in this order, so that's just the first thing to say, is Professor Klaus Schlünzen, who is from Sao Paulo State University in Brazil. He is a full professor of the Department of Statistics and the graduate programme in Sao Paulo State University, and also in terms of his background, he has a PhD in electrical engineering from Unicamp with a postdoctoral degree from Universitat Barcelona. So lots of different qualifications there. Importantly, he's also the national coordinator of the Professional Masters Programme in Inclusive Education. And he also is the coordinator for the Centre for the Promotion of Digital, Educational and Social Inclusion. So welcome to Klaus, thank you. Our second panel member is Professor Elizabete Cristina Costa from USCS University in Brazil. She has a PhD in education from the State University of Campinas, and she's also professor of the postgraduate department in education at the University of San Centeno do Sul in Brazil. Importantly as well, in terms of research, she's coordinator of the research group that focuses on school accessibility and inclusive society. So welcome to Elizabete, thank you. Our third member of the panel is Associate Professor Linda Plantin from Kristianstad University in Sweden. Her research focuses on the relationship between teachers and students with neurodevelopmental difficulties. And she's also served as an editor with other international colleagues for two major anthologies. At her university, Linda is also a Doctor of Philosophy, specialising in special education teacher programmes with a passion for inclusivity. So welcome to Linda. Our fourth member of the panel is Professor Mustapha Aabi from Zohr University in Morocco. He is Professor of Education and Language Studies at the Department of English Studies in the Faculty of Arts and Human Sciences at the university. He's also Horizon Europe National Contact Point for Cluster 2, which focuses on culture, creativity and an inclusive society, and also Cluster 3, which focuses on civil security for society. He's also co-chair of the International Conference on Education Quality, so welcome. Two more to go. So our panel member number 5 is Dr. Lisa Padden. She's Deputy Director, UCD Access and Lifelong Learning in Ireland. Lisa partnered with AHEAD on the development of Ireland's national universal design digital badges and co-facilitates Ireland's MOOC-style rollouts of these digital badges, which now have more than 4,000 recipients. Lisa leads UCD's University for All initiative, a whole institution approach to the student inclusion, encompassing strategy, policy, teaching, learning and assessment, student supports and services, the built environment and technological infrastructure. So welcome. And our final panel member is Professor Frederic Fovet from Thompson Rivers University in Canada. Previously, he's held faculty positions at the University of Prince Edward Island and Royal Roads University. Currently, he's Assistant Professor in the School of Education at Thompson Rivers University in Canada. He has been Head of Accessibility Services at McGill University for a period of 4 years and was responsible for their wide-scale UDL rollout. UDL, an inclusion consultant, is what he does with both K-12 and post-secondary sectors in Canada. So welcome. So as you can see, we have an extremely esteemed panel gathered of our international scholars, and I'm going to hand over now to Sean, who will be gathering some insights from this panel, and he will be chairing this section. So thank you, everybody, and over to Sean.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. And I think the danger is after lunch that people begin to flag, that your head's stomach is full, feeling a little bit tired, put your head down on the table. I am having none of that, okay? So on your tables, there is a sheet of paper, and you will be expected to pay attention as this panelist speak, because the last part of the panel presentation involves you reflecting and thinking and identifying how what our panelists share, what that means for you personally, what it means for you organizationally, and perhaps what it might mean for networks, research networks that you might be involved in. So you have 3 tasks, okay? If you're on your phones, etc., I do hope that you're on your phones in order to take notes in terms of the responses to the questions that our panelists will share. So without further ado, because as I said, what we aim to do is to leave you about 10 or 15 minutes for those activities towards the end. So I think one of the aspects of universal design was that it was developed some 40 years ago in Boston, in the United States. So it's a North American construct, and it was primarily developed with maybe K through 12, so primary school children in mind. I think things have shifted and changed for the implementation of universal design for learning. So what I'd like the panelists to think about is how do you perceive the unique social and cultural factors that you work in? How is that impacting on ideas of inclusivity, and I suppose more specifically in relation to universal design for learning? And because I'm Irish, I'm not going to have a structure to this. It's open to whoever would like to respond. So I'll just wait for one of the panelists to respond to that particular question. Don't all jump at once, please. There you go, Lisa.
Since I'm Irish as well.
Klaus was a close second.
Sorry, Klaus. So I suppose in Ireland, there's a lot of really positive societal factors that have led to where we are with universal design, and we are, I would say, relatively progressed in terms of how we are embedding universal design and inclusion. But traditionally, I think in Ireland, and Irish people would have seen themselves as quite a homogenous population, and not necessarily with a view to increasing diversity. But that has changed, I think, dramatically in the last 20 years. And in terms of some of the factors, I think, that have impacted that, obviously being part of Europe, but also actually having more visibility of the diversity that was already there, and people feeling more comfortable to be themselves, I think. We're really lucky in terms of having national legislation and national policy around inclusion, having a national access plan, having research that really shows who the groups are that are traditionally underrepresented in higher education. And with that visibility and that data then comes a responsibility, obviously, to make our environment more inclusive. I think some of the barriers we have are around a lack of, I think, connectedness around the different education sectors, so from primary to secondary and then higher and further education, that there isn't necessarily a consistency in approach, and that can be challenging for learners, so for students. But the really positive piece, I think, is around the kind of grassroots movements that have happened. So the digital badges, just kind of, it was a lot of bottom-up approach in terms of we'll build it and we'll see who'll turn up and do it. And obviously a lot of the professional development that we have promoted, developed and facilitate, it's all voluntary. So none of it is compulsory, none of it, we started off with very little funding. But I think there is a real culture of inclusion in Ireland now at the moment, and we're really seeing the results of that in terms of the numbers that we've seen engage in the professional development programs, and also looking at parity of esteem. And I think there is a culture of kind of equity and being quite disruptive in Ireland, so which is quite good. So we have a new digital badge, which is universal design beyond the classroom. So looking at the parity of esteem between faculty and professional staff within higher and further education. So we're always looking at where are the gaps and where do we need to improve ourselves in terms of our inclusion as well. But overall, I think the collaborative nature of the higher and further education sector in Ireland has been a real positive for us.
Just a very quick comment. I think it's perhaps that we had a little bit of a discussion around this at our table at lunchtime. It might be a little bit easier when you have a population of 6 million people, size of Birmingham, you know, city, and it's easier, I suppose, to develop that element of consistency and kind of shared approaches and whatever else. Let's move to a totally different context. Okay, so over to yourself.
Thank you. I would like to thank the opportunity to be here, and I'm sorry, I apologize, but I don't speak English very well. I hope that you understand me. Yes, but I usually start my conference makes auto descriptions. Maybe is there the blind person here? Oh yes, yes. I am a white man with white hair, green eyes, thin lips and nose. I wearing a white shirt and blue pants and black shoes. It's very important in Brazil. It's a culture in the inclusion. It's necessary to that person realize then I am. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, the challenge and the inclusion is very in Brazil. It's a challenge. I suppose all the world. Brazil has 215 million inhabitants. Then almost 46 with disabilities. Yes, and this context is interesting in Brazil. There are laws, inclusion laws, that it's the policy is all the students can study in the same classes, in the normal classes, regular classes, all the students. Yes, this is a big challenge because the teachers does not to train to work in this context. Yeah. Then I suppose that I think in this context the problem is in the 3 pillars, and the first, access, and the second, permanence, and the last, participation. Yes, the first, access, is the easiest because I can use technology. I have policies, architectural accessibility, digital accessibility. It is easy, but the permanence and participation, this is the problem, the big problem. Yes, because in Brazilian context, when I see in the regular classroom, then I have the blind student and the deaf student or autism student. Wow, how can I work in this context? Yes, this is the big problem. And now my research group and Professor Elizabete too work this training process, teachers, sorry, training teachers to work in this context. Yeah, and it's different form because in our we go in the school and work together. The teacher make possible to use. Yeah, that, of course, we use the pedagogic approach that call it constructionist, contextualizing, significant, meaningful approach with UDL, Universal Designer for Learning. But in the process, the training process, make inside the school, together the teacher. Then I establish a dialogue inside the school. It's very important for us because it's the opportunity, the university learn a lot how can I can inclusion in basic education or higher education. Okay.
I think that's really helpful, really interesting insight, and just to share, I think a little bit on that Brazilian context as well. I've had the good fortune to have visited some of the schools, and professors don't sit on high chairs. They're out, they're active, they're engaged with the communities, and no more so, I think, than Elizabete Costa renders, particularly working in the favelas and working with more marginalized communities in relation to providing that element of access and accessibility. So yeah, I think one last little point, yeah.
Sorry. It's important to say, what is inclusion for us? Inclusion is valuing the difference. It's not only respect the difference. I need valuing the difference, because the difference complement us. This is the secret for me. Okay, then we work at the potential, no difficulty. Okay,
that's a great place to start. I think Sweden is really keen to jump in on this kind of this picture. So
no,
over to yourself, Linda. Yeah.
Yeah, what would I say? No, but I will say that Sweden have had a history of long time being quite recognized as being quite good at inclusive education and so on. And we have a lot of regulation in the Swedish Education Act and other regulatory documents that claims to be designed for including all students. However, that is not completely true either, because we are one of few countries in the world that have an school form that is designed for only students with intellectual disability. And that is something that you can discuss whether that is something that is inclusive or not. But besides that, we have a school system that and a legislation that emphasizes that all students that are in need of special support should receive that within their regular classrooms. And we have those functions like the Swedish National Agency for Education and the National Agency for Special Education in Schools that are working on behalf of the government to provide schools with support to work more inclusive. And additionally, we have something in the Higher Education Act that says that we are going to work for broadening recruitment and broadening participation to allow all students to access higher education as well. And as many other countries, we have, since 2020, we have the Convention on the Right of the Child. It's a Swedish law that we need to follow. And we have also, since 2015, an amendment in the Swedish Discrimination Act that says that lack of accessibility is a form of discrimination. And that also means that school can now face legal action if they don't make learning accessible for all students. So in many ways, we have taken many important steps to work towards a totally inclusive education. But as I assume that we are going to talk about later, we have many more steps to take. Mm.
Thank you so much. And over to yourself, Mustapha.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you very much for these insightful presentations from my colleagues from Brazil, Ireland, and Sweden. These experiences show that the challenges are not always universal, but they can be unique, unique. And I resonate with what Klaus said, that we should not only identify the diversity, but we should value diversity. So if you allow me, I'm gonna be a bit long, just giving just a brief overview of my setting, my university setting. We are a large university, well, compared with Morocco. I'm not comparing my university with Brazil. They have 250 million people, but we cater for over 150,000 students and cover almost over 52% territory of Morocco. And we provide for students from some of the most disadvantageous areas in Morocco. So in a way, we navigate a rich tapestry of challenges, socio-economic challenges, and cultural factors that can influence our efforts towards inclusion. So, and our culture is characterized by this diverse mix of ethnicities, languages, and traditions. And but one unique factor is that strong sense of family and community ties. And here I resonate again with one of the points made, that we should value we should value that diverse and cultural heritage that provide sometimes opportunities to support inclusive education. So we should value that cultural diverse heritage, and it can support our. Having said that, I resonate again with the point made by Lisa on that grassroots momentum. Just to give you again an example, UDL in Morocco and at Ibn Zohr University specifically is rather an individual initiative. It's individually by colleagues, by member of faculty, driven by their belief in inclusive education. So that grassroots momentum is significantly creating a change in our university. We can see that in updating of our teaching syllabi, our resources, and so that I again just resonate that point of that challenges are not always universal. They can be unique, and that's where that's a bit conflicts a bit with the universal perception of inclusive education, and that we should not only identify diversity, but should as well embrace it, and internationally and not only locally. Thank you. Over to you.
That's great. Okay, thank you so much. And actually, I'm going to change focus for you slightly, Frederic. And I'm going on. And I'll allow you to do that as chair. I'll allow you to do that. No problem. But what I wanted to do is to kind of slightly shift in a direction that Mustapha took things, actually, because I know one of your areas of passion and one of your areas of interest is very much on decolonization of UDL and of maybe more wider aspects to curriculum. And I suppose in the North American context, it's really interesting. And it's certainly, I was looking at some of the panels and they're nodding their heads. So I think that that's something that resonates a little bit with the panel and perhaps with other colleagues who are here as well. So perhaps if you could weave that element into the social and cultural dimension of what you were about to start off with. That would be great. Thank you.
I'll do both, but I did want to still talk to the first point because I'm going to be a dissonant voice here. I think everyone's talked about hope and great things happening in development. And because I'm the Canadian, you probably think I'm going to say, oh yeah, all is well in Canada. I think the biggest social cultural factor that we have is resistance. Probably the worst resistance we've had to inclusion yet in the history of education. And all I can do is storytelling, but an example I use with a lot of my graduate students, 2018, CBC, it's a national TV, runs a panel out of Newfoundland on a Sunday at 10 o'clock. You have principals, teachers, parents, etc. That panel, within an hour, spun around and concluded that inclusion was not a good thing, or we probably should go back to segregated education. I keep taking my students back to that and saying, you see, there's a shift there happening. It's quite dangerous. Now, you probably, I don't know if you know much about Canada, we repatriated the Constitution in 1982. We have a Charter of Rights, which protects, gives us wide-ranging protections against diversity. But we also had slid in something there, which is called a notwithstanding clause, which means that a province can decide it's not going to follow the Constitution on a specific point. So 2024, Quebec has instituted a law that prohibits the wearing of articles of faith. So a teacher can be sacked, a student can be sent home for actually showing an article of faith on their clothes. New Brunswick, which is often cited as the example of UDL model for Canada, New Brunswick and Saskatchewan have both now invoked the notwithstanding clause to reject trans rights and sexual orientation, gender identity laws within their own provinces. This is where we are in 2024. So I'm going to argue to you that things are not as good as they probably should be. In the post-secondary sector, I was interviewed by a magazine called The Walrus just before I came here, actually, and it calls itself the Canadian New Yorker. And the person's writing a piece on UDL in higher ed in Canada. And I said to him at the beginning, I said, what's your take here? Where are you coming from? And he's, well, we're reacting to the national waves of faculty who say this is a bunch of crap. Right? This is their stance. He interviewed me 3 times. He keeps coming back and saying, okay, I've had one more argument. What do you answer to this? This is going to be published soon, so we'll see. I'll be as surprised as you are to see what comes out. But there's a huge resistance, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge, I think, for UDL. It's hard enough to do inclusion work at the moment. It's even harder to try and say that we have to move to the frontier of inclusion and do the UDL part. But now, in terms of what Sean also wanted me to talk about, I think we need to look around at the fact that UDL has been, I'm going to be provocative here, but a white middle class discourse. And we haven't tackled it much beyond impairment and disability. And we haven't really tackled the lack of representation within our scholarship and our literature. And I think there's a huge amount of work, if we want to be seen as credible, to also start stretching that model in all sorts of directions, particularly in relation to, and I'll talk about this tonight in the workshop, with, for us, Indigenous voices. So that goes for Australia, New Zealand, the States, and Canada. But also for our relationship to the Global South, right? We have been a discourse that has not done enough to include partners from the Global South. And it can't really mean much if you're talking about creating authentically diverse frameworks if from the get-go you're leaving half the world population out, if not more than half the world population. So I think it's a call for action to ask us, what can we all do to widen that discourse, to have authentic collaborations with partners elsewhere to create a global platform where we actually are thinking about the power dynamics, and that could come in terms of opportunities for scholarships, for dissemination, for authentic collaborations in projects themselves. Because we have a real danger that we're pushing a sort of post-colonial view through this notion of UDL that we're sort of projecting on the world. That's it. That was my provocative part for that.
Thank you. And I think in terms of what your actions are going to be later on, I suspect that there'll be a couple of little pointers there for people to identify. Thank you so much. I like that shift. I like that shift that you've given things. But I'm going to come to Elizabete, Costa Renders, and I suspect you certainly had a proponent there, Frederic, in relation to the ideas that you were sharing. So over to yourself, Elizabete, in terms of some insights that you wanted to give. I'm particularly, you know that I'm particularly interested in an area of your work, which is the pedagogy of the seasons. And there's another colleague of mine here, Emma Richardson, who talks about, Emma thinks, oh God, he's going to draw attention to me. And you speak about crib time, which is something similar on the necessity for us in terms of this maybe new ways of thinking about education. But I'll turn this into a question. So how might we learn from the pedagogy of the seasons? Oh, sorry, it's not on your question sheet, but you should know me by now, Elizabete.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. It's an honor if you're here. I have some notes. In Brazil, we are working with the teachers from public schools in the postgraduate, and the education research in Brazil showed the necessary research about the pedagogical and technological support for the teaching practices based on the inclusive paradigm, aiming at special education in the inclusive perspective. This our point, the special education in the inclusive perspective. In our group, Access Study Group, we have opted for UDL and the pedagogy of seasons as a support for teaching professional development, because we did invest in this aspect. Why use the pedagogy of seasons metaphor? It's a metaphor. No? I have an invitation for you. Think about how your experience with the different seasons of the year is. How it's your favorite season. How do seasons influence your relationship with the space and times during the day? Are the experience different? For example, for me this week, I had two different experiences. Yesterday I was in Brazil and it's winter there. Today I'm here, and when we experienced the summer, yes, it was possible because I traveled by plane for me, but I understand it is important to think about how seasons of the year are lived simultaneously at different times and space by people. It's our point with this work with the teachers from the public schools. Sorry. The seasons of the year clearly show that the light and the sun get to all parts of the planet, but not with the same intensity or at the same time. Similarly, all knowledge gets to everyone at different times and spaces, respecting the ecology of knowledges and temporalities. The seasons are in annual calendar, but don't settle in chronos. They shift in terms of planetary movement and differ in each hemisphere. The inclusive practice requires to explore the temporalities and the space of the learning that don't fit into institutional pedagogical times, just as there are variables in the continuous movement of the seasons that enable conditions for life on our planet. Also, teachers need to consider the variations and work required to cater for individualized learning according to dynamics informed curriculum design and implementation. So, by adapting to pedagogy of seasons, learning occurs within a cyclical movement where it's possible to align systems of responsibility with systems of diversity. At each learning station, the content offered could be the same, but the intensity of the requirements would be different, in greater complexity at each education experience. The pedagogy of seasons defends the learning for all, entails working for accessibility, and provides for imaginative anticipation in its multiple dimensions that had based two concepts. And I finish. The simultaneous plurality, it questions the imposition of chronos or linear time by engendering different ways of perception, interaction, action from learners, and anticipating multiple implications of temporalities and spaces as they influence teaching learning process. The second concept is narrative learning, from Goodson. It's questioned the traditional curriculum because it encourages engagement and motivation from the learnings in the learning process. It's important to consider the learnings and their dynamic life histories. So I invite you to ask yourself following questions, 2 questions. My question now. What change or resource I needed to respect the different temporalities and the space in the process of teaching and learning for all? How can we bring universal design for learning closer to pedagogy of seasons as support for inclusive teaching practices? I think is my point.
I think they're wonderful questions, and I think in addition to putting those questions to the audience here, I think those questions should be reflected back to the panel. So I think it's a challenge, isn't it? It's a challenge to us in terms of the nature of curriculum development, the nature of assessment, particularly norm-based assessments, which tend to predominate from primary into secondary, into higher education. So have you managed to, any of you, to kind of influence systems so that they begin to think differently away from those very boundaried and structured one-size-fits-all approaches in relation to either higher education or in relation to the primary or secondary education? Oh, Linda, are you good?
Now, I want to say that I have a good example, but as Ashna was saying earlier this morning, was that some schools are very good at working with the UDL and some are not, and we are not having the whole community working with the UDL. But I have a good example of implementing in one municipality in Sweden that we actually worked for 2 years, and it was on behalf of the head of the school that initiated a project that we would implement UDL in the whole municipality, from the principals to the teachers, and also in preschool. And it went out very well. But as I said, there were many factors that contributed to that. First of all, because the implementation was made from the head of school, there were also good infrastructure that made it possible for the teachers to educate in UDL, but also to an environment that allowed them to feel safe and to try to implement. And they had to do it over and over again, and try and over again, as in we used collaborative learning, and that was very useful in this work. But then I know also we have been, because Frederic, you were into that about the criticism about UDL, and Sweden are facing the same thing now. We have worked a lot with UDL in many municipalities, but we have faced criticism regarding actual learning outcomes from it. And I think that is something that is really what do you say in English? I forgot the word. No, but it problematic, because I think it's very problematic, because the claim is that the research done is not evidence-based, and then we need to figure what is evidence-based research in education, because we can never do randomized trials, and even if we do quasi-experimental designs, we can never say there are so much confounders, so we can never say it's because of this that happened. But another criticism in Sweden has been that there are so much research about students' perceptions, but on the other hand, if students perceive using UDL as being engaging and motivation, isn't that the best evidence of that UDL is really working? And if it makes our students feel more secure, make them feel more engaged and motivated, then I think we have quite strong evidence that it is really a good model to work with.
Thank you. It does seem like that the orientation has changed to the realpolitik. So where we are currently in relation to what the maybe policy factors are, and perhaps how to impact at that policy level, maybe through research. Mustapha, could I put you on the spot slightly in relation to that, and get kind of thinking about that in the Moroccan context?
Yeah. Thank you, Sean. Well, as I mentioned before, it seems that UDL-like initiatives are emerged largely as individual initiatives driven by faculty members who are very supportive of UDL. But this grassroots momentum is as well complemented by an increasing top-down support at the national and institutional level. Like nowadays, one of the most comprehensive education reform in Morocco acknowledges and recognizes inclusive practices as one of the main pillars of reform. So the reform is called the Pact ISRI 2030. So inclusion is an important part of higher education in Morocco, which has never been the case, especially in higher education. So that's a change in policy. That's which is very encouraging. Having said that, there is we have passed as well legislation regarding inclusion, and we have very ambitious programs. Having said that, there is always, as I was discussing with Klaus before, there is that sometimes that gap between policy and practice. So especially in terms of operationality. So we can get, sometimes we have the resources, but in terms of operationality, it can be very problematic. Quoting Linda again, it can be very problematic. So basically so there is a lot that needs to be done in terms as well of what my colleague from Canada mentioned, like that resistance to change. There is that problem. So people would say that's just a new bad concept. That change, and that's what we call deep change. It's harder to achieve. You know, you can influence people on buying a car, but changing their thought, it takes longer. It takes a very exhaustive, very comprehensive undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to the panel. I think we've just kind of we haven't managed to get to the depth, I think, of, and hopefully this is just the beginning of some of the conversations that we can have over the next few days, so that I think the audience will have had an opportunity to see some of the sort of key areas, to identify some of the key areas that we've discussed. But I'd like to thank all of you for those insights from kind of the national contexts. And again, I think I'm going to maybe spotlight on Lisa, who you started, and saying that I think through that bottom-up approach and that top-down approach, because it's had a tremendous impact. I'm really quite familiar with, I think, how a systemic change has come about within one jurisdiction because of that. And I think to some extent it mirrors some of the early initiatives that occurred under Associate Professor Richard Jackson's work and the work of CAST in the United States, that managed to have that, through the civil rights movement, have that impact on policy changes significantly across the states. But if I'm going to spotlight on any country where those rights are under threat at the moment, that would be certainly one of the countries where there is that most significant pushback. Now, at the outset, I set you a challenge. What are the implications for you personally? What are the implications for you organizationally? And what are the challenges for us as communities, as communities of practitioners who are committed to bringing about positive change in this domain? And I can see that one or two of the candidates are just dying to jump on the pens. So please do. What I'd like you to do is to make those notes. You have 10 minutes. I'm expecting full bullet point reports from each one of those tables actually afterwards. So over to you, and have those discussions. But what's discussed isn't enough. I want to see that evidence on your note paper afterwards. So identify a note keeper on each one of the tables who will do that job. Thank you so much to the panel in particular. Thank you. Good round of applause, please, before you disappear. Thank you. Can I was encouraged by my colleagues here in my Brazilian colleagues to actually, because they really value this feedback, that this is not lost. So can I encourage people, if one representative, if you wouldn't mind, to share these here, and I'll take a photograph. We'll put it on. We'll have a record of kind of your feedback from this. Now, what I'd like you to do is to. I'm not going to go around tables because I think that's a little bit kind of false or something. However, if there's anybody who would like to say, well, yeah, we have a really interesting idea, or here's something that we're passionate about, that we'd like to share. Absolutely. And so is there anybody from the tables? Not necessarily. Right, so this is where everybody is avoiding eye contact with me. Okay, that's perfectly fine as well. What I'll do is I'll just collect those papers from the table. So and if you wouldn't mind, continue those conversations over tea and coffee. Now I need my magic team, but they're not around because people keep me on track. I'm not sure where we're headed next, or we're heading to Jenny Lind next. So that involves a little bit of walking a little bit of walking, experiencing the city, coming out of this wonderful air-conditioned environment, and actually going into the pedagogy of the seasons. Okay, the real 1 week of summer that Britain has to offer. So, yes.
Oh, wait.
You want to experience? Okay, thank you. I did ask, but over to yourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
From the wonderful.
Yeah,
okay.
I figured that one.
I'm Professor Sujata Bhan, and from my attire, you can see I'm from India. Okay. Yeah. So after this wonderful presentations and discussions by all the panelists, we had our small discussion, and we have come up with more questions. Questions leading to more questions. So we have more questions than answers. But I wanted to still share it with the group. Betsy particularly said that the talk by Dr. Fovet, I may be mispronouncing the name, from Canada, spoke that there is a shift in the mindset, maybe away from inclusion. So that's alarming for us because we are trying to promote UDL. So what are the drivers of the shift away from inclusion? We need to identify those, and as educators, we need to combat them, right? And Hassan said that success of UDL depends on various parameters. How can we make or identify those parameters for the UDL success? And in each context, those parameters will be different. So if we can identify those parameters in our context, we talk about them and share it in our context with others, perhaps we can make UDL work and inclusion work in that sense. Another point raised was the meaning of inclusion cannot be the same for everybody. There is not a single definition of UDL or inclusion for that matter, or inclusive education for that matter. Again, it will change contextually. So in a particular context, can we at least arrive at one common definition, which in that context people adhere to, and then start working towards that along with all stakeholders? Like the government is saying the same thing, the teachers believe in the same thing, and all the stakeholders are on the same page. In that context, there is one definition and we are all working towards it. I made a point, I said, can differentiated instruction be used within the framework of UDL? Because even in our country, there is a lot of talk happening that is UDL, or let's say, is inclusive education really working for all children? Because we have the government policy and all children by default are put in the public schools. But nothing is being done with those children. There is no engagement of those children. They're just physically present there. So in that instance, if the children are not just mildly having disabilities, but are with moderate and severe disabling conditions, can we have differentiated instruction for them, or will we be violating the UDL framework? Do we have to follow it to the T? But if we do so, the children may not be really achieving anything. So for those children, can we deviate a bit and give differentiated instruction to those children? That's a question that we have to answer. And like it was said in the morning, systemic change is very critical, very crucial. So the leadership primarily needs to believe in inclusion. It's then only that they will provide the resources, do the capacity building of their teachers, and bring in the flexibility for the teachers and the entire system to make it work. So yes, systemic change is the first thing that we have to think about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sujata. I think it was a really interesting insight, and I'm going to come back to that very first question that you asked, and in relation to Frederic's point around the resistance or pushback. And what's interesting to me is that pushback tends to come from the communities to some extent that we most want to involve. Those are the most marginalized communities who feel powerless, actually, and as a result of feeling powerless, they push against particular systems. So for me, it has to be about reaching out and engaging with those actually minoritized communities themselves as much as possible in our work, and we had a brief discussion in relation to that.